feels familiar. Yeah, I mean, I was.
Good morning, and welcome to our January 14th work session for the Paulding County School Board. I'd like to call our meeting to order. Thank you all for being here. Obviously you can see we have 6 board members here. Mr. Chester had a deposition that he could not rearrange, so he will not be joining us this morning. We also, of course, have our board attorney with us and our esteemed superintendent, Steve Barnett. Would like to start our meeting this morning by doing our invocation and our pledge. We are joined this morning by Danny Anderson from First Baptist Church of Dallas. If you would come to the podium and lead us in our invocation.
May we pray. Father, we thank you that we know that you are a mighty and holy God, and you've given us access through this prayer that we can come to you and make our request known, and you hear us. Lord, I thank you for this school board and this school system, Lord, that we have an opportunity to invest into children. And Lord, I remember through Scripture many times that you speak about those that are weak, those that are handicapped, those that are in need, those that are poor, the widows, the orphans. Lord, you've told us to love all of them and to care for all of them. Lord, you also even told us to love our neighbor as ourselves. So I pray is that as we make decisions, as we work through our days, that we can continue to care for people that need to be cared for, to show them integrity, Lord, that we will remember that they were created in your image. And Lord, I pray that you would just give us opportunities to be able to not just invest into people's lives, but also to see the reward. Lord, I thank you for the grace that you give us on a daily basis. Lord, I ask you to give this board wisdom to be able to make decisions, that you give them peace among themselves, and Lord, that there is a opportunity for unity in all things. Lord, we do thank you again and ask you for your guidance in Jesus' name. Amen.
And would you also lead us in our pledge?
Yes. Pledge to the American flag. Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. All right. We need now to adopt our agenda for this meeting. Everyone have a chance to review the agenda? And
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Nolan, second by Mr. Chester. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of, excuse me, Mr. Clayton, sorry. All in favor of approving our agenda? Unanimous. All right. Now we need to approve our minutes from our regular session meeting on December 10th, 2024. Do I have a motion? Motion by Ms. Lyons.
Second.
Second by everybody. I'm going to do second by Mr. Nolan. Any discussion? All in,
One thing, it's not a big deal, but my name was misspelled on there.
your name is misspelled.
It's not a big deal, but
All right, I will write that down to correct spelling of Teresa's name. All right, so all in favor of approving the regular session minutes from December 10th? It's unanimous. All right, at this point, I need to turn our meeting over to our esteemed attorney to assist us with the election of the board chairperson. We elect a new chairperson each and every year, and I'll turn it over to you to elect our chairperson.
All right, members of the board, I'll preside simply over this portion of the agenda. So at this time, I'll entertain any motions for appointment to be the chair of the Board of Education for this upcoming year.
I'll make a motion that we keep Ms. Collette as chairperson.
Second. All right, I have a motion by Mr. Fuller, second by Mr. Nolan. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed, like sign. All right, Madam Chair, congratulations, and
Thank you.
my job's done.
Thank you so much. Now we need to elect our board vice chair. So I need a motion for, or excuse me, nominations for that position.
Nominate Jeff Fuller.
All right.
I'll second.
Any others? Hearing none, Would like to ask for those in favor of Jeff Fuller being our vice chairman, and that is unanimous. Now we need to elect our board attorney. Can I get a
Make a
recommendation?
motion to retain Tyler Richardson and Cable, Mr. Tom Cable. I'll second.
Second, Mr. Fuller. Any discussion? All in favor? Thank you so much. Thank you. And now I want to turn it back over to you, if you do not mind, to help us with our board member pledge.
All right. Members of the board, each year you acknowledge and pledge the following. So I'm going to ask you if you all, probably should be better if we all stand. So let's just everybody stand, raise your right hand. I'm going to read this pledge, and if you will, just simply, if you agree, just simply affirm at the end by saying, I will. As a board member of the Paulding County Board of Education, I hereby acknowledge and agree to abide with board policies, and I will observe and enforce state laws and regulations pertaining to education. I will accept office as a board member as a means of unselfish service. I will transact school business only in regular sessions. I will represent the entire community without fear or favor. I will remember at all times that I am one of a team. I will accept all board decisions once they are made and assist in carrying them out effectively. I will delegate action to the chief school administrator as the board executive and confine board action to policymaking, planning, and appraisal. Therefore, as a board member of the Paulding County Board of Education, I hereby acknowledge and commit to abide with board policy BH regarding board ethics, and further, I will agree that at the first meeting of each year or the first meeting of a new board member to execute the aforementioned pledge, which shall become part of the board's meetings minutes for that meeting. If you agree, say I will.
I will. Thank you so much. Before I turn our meeting over to our superintendent for his report, first of all, I want to say thank you guys for electing me chairman again. I had an idea last year of something that I wanted to do to, and this is going to be brief, I promise, but something I wanted to do to help us all to remember why we are here. I know I speak for the board when I say none of us chose to run for this office for politics, for fortune, for fame. We did it because we love Paulding County, and we did it because we love the students here, and we want to make a difference. So with that in mind, I wanted something to help us as board members to focus on that each and every meeting. So I came up with an idea, ran it by our superintendent, and we came up with a little video that we will show at each meeting. It'll be something interesting for the public. You can watch and look to see if you can see your children there, but to just remember why we are here and why we have all chosen to do what we do. And I want to thank Mr. Dillon and Nikki and his team for putting this together for us. Run it. Chosen to do what we do is the slogan, our focus is their future. And with that, I will turn the meeting over to our superintendent for the report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I should mention, we're going to be shooting some more video in the back if y'all notice some people coming in with cameras. That's not Tom's paparazzi. They do follow him around, but that's not who's with us today. They're shooting some B-roll footage for a budget video that's going to come out a little bit later. So they'll be in and out if you notice them here this morning. So yeah, we're going to start with the superintendent's report, and we're excited again to have First Baptist Dallas here. with us this morning. I'm going to ask, there she is, Jana, to come up and talk a little bit about our partnership with the church and just how grateful we are for them to be a partner in education with us. So, yeah.
I'm so excited to be here to start this new year with another amazing partner in education recognition. It's been a couple of months, so we had to bring a really great one this month to be able to recognize. We do have with us Dallas First Baptist Church and some of their staff members. We have Danny Anderson, who's the senior pastor. We have Seth Schwab, who is the student and families minister, Adam Morris, who's children and families minister, and Eddie Lowry, who is the worship pastor. So we appreciate all of you being here today. Dallas First Baptist is so incredibly active in our community, in our schools, and in so many ways in Paulding County from all levels. Actually preschool, I could say elementary, but preschool all the way to high school. I have such a long list of things, but just to name a few, they support the backpack programs for the weekend meals at Northside and Hutchins Elementaries. They provide breakfast and snack items for Dallas Elementary. They partner with Fine Arts for locations for our middle and high school honor chorus. They fed the football teams this year at Paulding County High School and East Paulding High School. They helped sponsor our Build Professional Learning Conference for our administrators that we held over the summer. They've provided lunch for teachers at Northside and Dallas for teacher appreciation, hosted the downtown Dallas window painting students. I'm not sure if y'all saw that over the holidays, but the windows in Dallas were amazing, and they opened their doors and they gave hospitality to those students while they were walking the streets and painting those windows. They volunteer at Fine Arts Day, and they answered a call from help at Paulding County High School, a very last-minute call from help the week of their shows, and provided support with sound when they were having some technical issues. So they just really jump in at any possible moment and do it whatever's asked. I also happen to know, like I said, that they have an amazing preschool program. And they work with children every day to get them kindergarten ready, which is we appreciate having those students come to us ready to go, ready to learn, and they have a big part in the group of students that they are able to work with each and every day. So that's just a very few things in the ways that they support our students, our families in our community, our teachers, our administrators. And so that's why we want to recognize them today. And we have our very special Partners in Education sign that I'm going to present to them with. We'd love for you to put that out so everyone knows how much of a partner you are with us, how much you support us, and how much we appreciate everything that all of you do every day for us. Thank you very much. So, and I think if we can get a picture now with all of our board members.
Come out to the end, maybe. There we go. Mr. Dean, if you could, that's good right where you are. Perfect. All right, everybody. There we go. Big smiles. One more. Great, thank you so much.
two things we should note this morning is Danny's true claim to fame, Danny Anderson, is that he's the better, or I guess she's the better half. His wife's Katie Anderson, who works here at the district, and and she stepped out now. Oh, there she is. Yeah. I was going to brag on Janice DeGaulle for being here. She had a grandbaby last night.
Yeah.
Boone, I believe is his name, and so she, Boone, sounds like a country musician already. Just go ahead and sign him up. Boone's, I don't guess it'd be Stegall though, would it? But anyway, she's doing well, and we're tickled for her. So with that, we'll step through a few items. We kept the superintendent report kind of short today. Obviously wanted to start out by saying thank you to our board after today, and glad to be working with you here. Actually, I should say 2025 Board of Education. That's dated. Ms. Durham is not going to be able to be here this morning. She had a family emergency come up last night. So I'm going to step in and just mention a couple of things about the monthly financial update. Hopefully those old muscles will come back alive, and I can mention what she would say. There really wasn't anything too noteworthy from the report. It's still pretty early in the year. This was a November report of her monthly financial report. You can see there the two charts we look at the most. There is a percentage variance of year-to-date revenue to budget. We're a little ahead. You can see we're at 10.7% as opposed to 5.7%. That's just slack in the system. Remember, there was a delay in the due date for property tax bills, and so that also impacted, if you look at the report, our fund balance this time of year is a little bit heavier than it would normally be. That's just because, again, it all kind of came due a little quicker this year, and at least contained in the month of November, I should say. And so we're a little ahead there, but that'll all normalize over time, and so will this. So will the revenue. Will normalize over the rest of the year. And then the expenditures to budget there at the bottom. Again, that looks like there's a variance, but you really need to back out at 100%. You would see we're kind of threading the needle there, looking at 4%. So we're doing well. It's at 0.8% variance to budget on expenditures compared to last year's 1.2. So really an insignificant difference year over year. But the report is out there, of course, attached to the agenda. It's also on our website. And also is the monthly expenditure encumbrances report, which is a requirement of Georgia law. That is out there as well for the board and the public's review. So that is the monthly financial update. We were going to mention a couple things, and I'll just go ahead and hit them real fast this morning. There was recently the Senate Appropriations Committee requested a report to be done from the Department of Audits and Accounts on school district spending. And so we were going to mention a couple things related to that this morning. And so I'll hit just a couple of the highlights. The report really came, the purpose is there, by the way, on the screen, and the findings that I'll mention are related to that purpose this morning. But really, we kind of correlated with the report. We fell in line with some of the patterns that the report provided, but it also validated a lot of what we've been saying for years, and that's really what we wanted to highlight this morning. So this is not really a part of the report. It is in the report, but it's not a part of one of the findings. I did think it was interesting to mention, just because we're going to talk about some of this later this morning in that HB581 presentation. But QBE funding has increased for the school district from FY19 to FY24. That's what you see on the screen, the chart there. And we just kind of put our number on top of their exhibit. But the interesting thing about it is it has increased over time for us as well as the state. But you'll notice back in 19, we were below the average. So and all that is QBE divided by enrollment. And so by the time you get to 24, we're now above the statewide average. The reason for that is enrollment obviously plays a factor, but really the thing I wanted to note is that our students are now requiring more specialized services. So they are in now more heavily weighted categories, like it says there on the screen: special education, gifted, remedial, ESOL. Those are all examples. And so those are that's good. QBE in that sense is doing what it's supposed to do. It's funding those categories that are more expensive. But as you'll see later, QBE only accounts for a fraction of what the actual cost of educating a student is. So that also comes to bear on local revenue. So our students, we are growing, but the services required by our students are growing as well and becoming more expensive. That's going to, like I said, it's going to be, we're going to refer back to that here in a little bit. They're also going to, you're going to hear this a lot. In FY24, 38% of total revenue was from local sources. You're going to hear that over and over again. 13% of QBE is funded locally through the local fair share. Won't get into that right now because we're going to talk about it later. But QBE, local fair share as a component of QBE is an important thing to talk about. The quote there at the bottom just says, in academic year 2023, city and county school systems reported spending nearly twice the $7.8 billion of state funds allocated through the QBE formula. Systems employed approximately 119,000 full-time teachers, slightly more than the 116,000 earned through QBE. So the interesting thing about that, again, is just that's sort of a complicated sentence, but what it's really just saying is that QBE is only accounting for about a half of instructional. The rest has to come local. And so, QBE dates back to 1984 or 5, and so it's antiquated in a lot of ways, but anyway, so we'll talk more about that later. The other interesting thing I was going to mention is you catch that 119 full-time teachers, only slightly more. So you're talking about QBE's funds essentially half, but it's roughly the same number of full-time teachers. Again, that's just the quirkiness of QBE, and that has to do with how much it allocates per FTE, per employee. So it's just interesting that it's funding on paper a lot of our teachers, but it's only funding half the cost, if that makes sense. And it has to do with the way they value teachers. So QBE is just complicated, difficult to work with.
Value monetarily, not value.
Monetarily, not as individuals. Yeah.
Make sure we're clear about that.
Yes, ma'am.
How does that last slide that shows, what is the actual percentage from 2019 to 2024 as far as the increase, the percentage?
I'm not sure. I don't know that I have that.
I finished, the question I have is, how does that compare to inflation as far as a percentage wise?
Well, I can tell you, it outpaces inflation. It outpaces CPI. We're going to mention that later today. So that's great that you picked up on that. Yep, absolutely. Faster. Our expenses have grown at a faster rate than inflation.
I'd like to know exactly what the percentage difference is.
Yep, will do. The other thing that's not on the slide that I was going to mention is just another data point. In the report, you'll see that we grew in that period, 19 to 24, the time period of the report, we grew 7% in enrollment. The statewide average was 0.
Wow.
So again, just that's the uniqueness of Paulding. I should have mentioned earlier, by the way, the report itself is attached to the agenda. Ms. Durham's analysis of the report is also attached to the agenda. What we're showing you is just a few highlights. So that's all there for your review or the public's review. Just a few more highlights to mention. The report found that statewide total expenditures for direct instruction exceeded amounts earned through QBE. That's the quote I just read. But we're there at the top. Of course, the report didn't identify us, by the way, I should mention. We pull these numbers ourselves out to see what our percentage is, how they compared against statewide averages. But you can see there our instruction growth, and that's cumulative over those years, grew 35%. The state was 25%. But look at our instruction percentage of our total expenses. We're at 65%. The statewide average is 55%. We talk about it all the time that's our strategy, is push as much as we can to instruction. Looking down my notes here, one thing is, again, not on the screen that I thought was interesting is you look at our COVID relief spending. Now, this is in the report. It's just not in the PowerPoint here. If you look at our COVID relief spending, we spent 68% of the money that we received for COVID-19 on instruction, compared to the statewide average of 56%. It's even a greater delta. So that you're looking at that 55 versus 65%. At 10%, it grows when you look at our COVID spending. We spent way more than the statewide average. We utilize those funds for instruction at a greater percentage than the statewide average. Let's see what else. A couple other highlights here. The report found, the second finding is that the administrative expenditures have increased, but the administrative share of total expenditures has not changed. Another finding is that central office administrative spending has grown at a faster pace than school administration. And we followed that, we tracked with that, but there's a little bit of difference here with the uniqueness of Paulding. Again, we talk about this all the time, and this is sort of the validation that I was talking about. This is an independent, source, and what they're showing there is that if you look at admin, the circle there, the administrative percent of administrative expenditures percent of total expenditures, we started at 8%, we ended at 8% over that period. You look at central office, we started at 2 and we ended at 2. But look over to the left there, the central office expenditures statewide is 4%. We're about half, we spend about half as much as other school districts on average on central office type expenses. So it really validated, something the board has, has worked hard to do over the last, several years. Our central office expenditures did grow at a higher rate. But two things come into factor there. Number one, I went too fast, but look ahead there there we go. Of our administrative expenditures, over 2/3 of them are spent at the school, not in the central office. That's unique. If you look to the left there, school-based, among the average across the state was 55%. So what we do spend on administrative costs, we tend to push to the schools, not here necessarily the central office. And we did grow, right there you see central office 16% over that time period. But again, 16% of 2%, when you look at the numbers, it's such a small amount, you almost lose it in the rounding. Well, you do lose it in the rounding. I think that 2%, the first 2% you see there in 19, that was actually 1.8%, if I recall. And then by the time you get to 23, it's 2.4%. So it still rounds to 2%, but it did go up. Just like, every other school district in Georgia over that period, that's obviously going to grow. So we just, again, thought this was a validation of that we're doing the right thing and headed in the right direction. I think on this chart, it was just a highlight. Again, this is an exhibit right out of the report. It takes all 180 school districts and it breaks them into categories of spending. So the very top category there, that's just saying 13 school districts spent somewhere between $3,000 and $6,500 per pupil on administrative expenditures. We are all the way at the bottom down there, less than 1,200. There's only 39 districts in Georgia, I think it's around 22%, that spend lower than $1,200 per pupil. Now, we don't know the breakdown of all those districts, but I can imagine we're pretty low in that group because we do know that we spend we don't spend $1,000 on administrative expenses per pupil. So we think we would do a pretty good job managing those expenditures. And I think that is it. Again, the report's out there for you guys to look at. I'm sure we'll come back and mention a couple of the highlights there here in just a little bit. I did want to mention a couple of upcoming events. First is the 2025 Countywide Swim Championships. That's this Friday, the 17th, starting at 6:30. I think senior night events start at 5:15. That's going to be at the Cherokee Aquatic Center. On Friday, January 27th, we'll host our countywide spelling bee in the East Paulding High School Auditorium. And anyone who decides to come as an adult, prepare to be humbled and just swallow your pride and come on in, take it like the rest of us. It's pretty impressive. And then, of course, this Friday, January 17th is Digital Learning Day. It's also a district PL day as well. And then on Monday, January the 20th, this next Monday, school will be closed in honor of Martin Luther King, in honor of the Martin Luther King holiday. And then, of course, there you see on the screen winter breaks just right around the corner in February.
Mr. Barnett?
Yes, sir.
On the spelling bee, can we go back to that? It says Friday, the 27th is a Monday. So
Okay.
is that going to be the 30th or the 31st or the 24th?
We'll find
It
out.
says 27th.
It's the 24th, not the 27th. Okay.
Okay.
We need to correct that because that came off the website, or the
Gotcha.
social media. So Jay, if
it's
you'll
the
correct that.
So you said the 24th is?
Is it the 24th? Okay. And then just a couple more things. Of course, we enjoyed the snow day last Friday, and I really want to just take a minute. I mean, obviously, there's all kind of great pictures out there on social media of kids encouraging a snow day, and then how they spent their snow day, and how some teachers tried to use puppets to entice a snow day there at the top left at Roberts. But I definitely want to take a second to thank our maintenance department. The director, Brian Ragsdale, all his guys, they were out over the weekend making sure we were ready to go for Monday. So they need to be acknowledged, as well as our transportation department, especially yesterday. Of course, transportation is ran by Executive Director Trey Studstill. But yesterday was a challenge. It wasn't easy. And those guys rose to that challenge, and so we want to say a special thank you to them. All of our administrators for getting our school ready, for dealing with a snow day, even some of our vendors like RKR who stepped up at North Paulding High School, I think, to make sure the parking lot was clear and ready to go for yesterday. So just a lot of folks to thank. Again, just cute pictures all over social media. And again, some undue influence was attempted on calling a snow day, I'll just add. But I do think we were due a snow day. I think we had principals sing, do you want to have a snow day, which is,
Oh, that was awesome.
I guess.
Do you have that video?
No, I don't. Was it Frozen? That's from Frozen. And then, the top right there is,
That was fun.
again, that came from a movie, but I didn't really recognize it. But they're lecturing me on, I better have a snow day, I think, or something.
You'll be popular.
They'll be popular. That's what it was, yeah. And then, but they were all kinds, from PJ days to anything they could do to try to, any kind of incantation they could do to get a snow day on Friday was done last week, and it was successful, and it was a great break. Again, I don't know, we've had a snow day in a couple of years where we actually called a snow day as opposed to something else. So anyway, again, thanks to everybody for yesterday. Just wanted to mention that our next board meeting will be on January the 28th for our board recognition meeting. It'll start at 5:30 with executive session, then recognitions start at 6:30 p.m. And it's not on the slide here, but I also just wanted to mention real quick a thank you to Chairman Estes, our new commission chairman, who is again going to provide the school district a seat on the Planning and Zoning Commission. And so Mr. Wicks has agreed. Was that voluntold or whatever they say? Actually, I think he was excited to do it. He does a great job. So Jacob Wicks will continue to be our representative on that commission, and I think they'll probably be approved, I think, by the commissioners, maybe even today or sometime soon. So we'll continue on with that into this year. So Madam Chair, that is the superintendent report, and I know we're going to move into some board actions now, I believe.
Yes, we are.
And I'll start with the first recommendation, if you don't mind, Michelle, pulling it up. It's our board meeting dates, the board's meeting dates for 2025. This really hasn't changed since the draft we've been sending around for a while now. So give me a second just to peruse it, but I know the board's you've already looked over this over the last 2 months probably. So that, Madam Chair, I'll ask for the board's approval for the 2025 board meeting dates.
Hearing the superintendent's recommendation for approval of the 2025 board meeting dates, do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Lyons, so moved by Mr. Nolan, second by Ms. Lyons. I'm tongue-tied today. Is there any discussion on the meetings for 2025? Hearing none, can we get a vote for the approval of the meeting dates? Phew. It is unanimous.
Now, the second action item here is the board's approval of its 2025 board norms and protocols. You'll remember that GSBA requires this to be a vote of the board. It's part of the requirements it's a best practice of an exemplary board. And so I would ask this morning that the board approve its norms and protocols.
Hearing the superintendent's recommendation for the approval of the 2025 board norms and protocols, which we have all had an opportunity to read and see numerous times in the last couple of weeks, do I have a motion to approve those? So moved by Mr. Clayton. Second by Mr. Nolan. Any discussion? All in favor? It is unanimous.
The next item is a consent agenda that was presented at the last board meeting in December. There are two items on the consent agenda. The first one is SNP's RFP 2024-25 cafeteria tables. It's an award to Ernie Morris. And the second item is an architectural contract with Robertson Lofta Roof, who is doing the design work on the renovation modification of South Paulding High School. That one, of course, is subject to legal review, and I would ask the board's approval of the consent agenda.
Items 1 and 2, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Hearing the superintendent's recommendation for the approval of the consent agenda items 1 and 2 as presented. Do we have a motion for that?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Fuller, second by Mr. Clayton. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous.
We have two items that were discussed previously again in December, but we wanted to have a separate vote of the board to approve. The first is a GMP construction contract for work to be done at Poole Elementary. The renovation and modification is going to go on there, I think, starting next summer, correct, Mr. Carey? That's this upcoming summer, correct? This summer, that's right. And so again, this was presented last time, but I am asking this morning approval of the contract with Smith Built Construction Group of Alpharetta, Georgia, to perform renovations and modifications at Poole Elementary School, subject to legal review.
Hearing the recommendation of the superintendent to approve Poole Elementary School's GMP contract as presented in the December 10th board meeting, do I have a motion? So moved by Mr. Clayton.
Second.
Second by Mr. Nolan. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Yes.
And then the next item is regarding naming of Paulding County High School's auditorium. Again, we discussed this in December, but I know we might have, and Jason, I don't know if you want to introduce anyone this morning, but I know we've got the daughter of Dr. Davis here with us. I'm not sure where she is, but there she is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Barnett. We do have some special guests with us here this morning. I'm so excited that they could join us. Marissa, Dr. Davis's daughter, and then Dr. Davis's wife, and they have two friends with them. I'm gonna let Marissa just introduce them right quick.
My name is Marissa Davis. I'm Dr. Davis's daughter. This is his wife Gloria, and we've got two family friends, Sandy Carson and Emily Nuts, who are both part of the VIII program.
Awesome.
Well, thank you guys for being here. Ms. Davis, thank you for being here. And so we're proud to honor him. And of course, this is the formal naming, but there'll be we'll make a bigger ceremony out of it likely in February. But this morning, board, I do request approval of naming the Paulding County High School Auditorium in honor of Dr. Ronnie Davis.
Do I have a motion? So I got a first by Ms. Lyons, I've got a second by Mr. Clayton. Any discussion? All in favor? It is unanimous.
And of course, we'll make sure the board's aware of that, of when that ceremony will be, and be excited to join you once again and honor an outstanding person, an outstanding educator. With that, I believe we have a couple of informational items this morning. One is just a brief update. It's a quarterly report. Again, we're trying to get very diligent in our quarterly reports. This one's going to be pretty short because of the way the schedule worked out. I believe you were just here in late November. So it's not quite a quarter, but we wanted Mr. Carey to kind of give us a quick update on some of our projects. And of course, he will be available before the next board meeting. And then also, I should have mentioned earlier that after today's board meeting, if you have any questions on the last quarterly reports, those folks will be available today. But Mr. Carey, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair Collette, and board members, and Mr. Barnett. Thank you for this time this morning. I'm going to quickly run through this quarterly report. As Mr. Barnett said, it's not quite been a full quarter since I've updated you last. Quick reminder: there is a quarterly report that is on the website. If you feel compelled to dive in a little deeper, there's a full report on the capital programs page on the website. So I'm going to hit some highlights here really quick. Active projects, those are the projects that are actively under construction right now. So you see the list there. You may have thought I would never say these words, but North Paulding High School addition, we are almost there. You can see the completed is, we're targeting, April. You'll see some photos in just a minute. It's coming along very far. Next up, under additions, we've got North Side and Roberts. Those are both fully involved additions, and you'll see some photos in just a minute. Those are scheduled to be completed for this coming August, ready to go for the next school year. And then, as Mr. Barnett just said, and you all just approved, thank you very much, the GMP for Poole, that is going to be actively under construction anytime now, and that's ready to be complete for August, and that's a renovation. As well as Moses, you'll be presented the informational item for the GMP on Moses later today. That's also going to be under construction very soon, as you can see, and also ready for completion this summer. On the left there is just a snippet of what the actual quarterly report is on the website, but just for your informational knowledge, second, third floors are near complete. They're working their way down. Really, the first floor finishes are expected to be done by the end of this month. You'll see a photo in just a minute. It looks near complete at this moment. They're finishing up some fine details. The elevator is one. Got some exterior finishes to do on the outside. Had a little slowdown this month, but there's no problem with being done on time. Looking to try to have some sort of ribbon cutting in the plans for the month of March. So there'll be more information to come on that. Here's some photos. Now this was pre-snowstorm, a little bit, around Christmas. So even these are a little bit out of date as of now. But you can see the hardscape is nearly finished on the outside. Just some fine details to do on the exterior. Inside, upper floors are nearly finished, and then just fine tuning some things here and there. Next up, North Side. Coming along very well. Block wall on the exterior is pretty much complete. We're working on the brick veneer, in fact, and then they've got mechanical, electrical upgrades going on, or infrastructure, roof systems going on. They're expecting to try to dry in the building by the end of January. So it's coming along very well. And here's some photos of the progress. Now, when I say dry in, it does not mean it's complete. It just means it's dried in. So on the right there, you see the block wall, and you see some of the brick veneer going on. That's kind of the state they were in, a few weeks ago. So by dried in, we're talking about the roof. We're talking about openings kind of closed in, and the weatherproofing on the outside of the block, so that they can begin doing some more work on the inside. And then you can see that's the roof deck on the upper left, and then here's an overall aerial shot. You can see that's the addition there, and there's quite an extensive amount of site work that had to be done prior to the addition going on. So they've done a lot of work, and it's coming along really well. Roberts, same kind of scope of work, and it's about the same process here. So a lot of the same things are repeated here. So the steel's there. The block infill's well underway. They're trying to have the building dried in, by the end of next month. And here are some photos of Roberts. Again, you can see the building block. This on the right here, that's a mock-up panel. That's what we do to try to make sure that the brick's going to match before we order a whole bunch of brick and make sure that it's going to look good. So that's a mock-up panel against the existing brick on the building. So we're trying to make sure everything's going to be just right. There's just a shot of the inside structure that's there already. So moving on, upcoming capital projects. These are projects that are not really under construction yet, but are heavily in the design phase. And you all haven't seen too much yet from a board presentation point of view on where we are with the elementary school 20, but it is it is actively in design, and we'll have some graphics to show you real soon. Trying to be in the construction phase this summer. That's scheduled to be complete by August of '26, and very soon you might even see some activity going on the site, clearing the property and that sort of thing. We've got a big renovation coming up that you just approved the architectural contract for. Thank you very much. That's South Paulding High School, so that's underway, and that's going to be a multiple summer project. That's a very intense, large-scale renovation that's going on. And then we've got some multi-purpose athletic buildings going on that I'm going to speak more of in just a minute. Here it is. Okay, there's a slide. That's the floor plan. So we're doing one of these at each, not all 5 high schools, because one of them already had ample, East High School already had a large field house there. But these are scheduled to go in at Hiram, North, South, and Paulding. And this is the floor plan. That grade-in area is the size of a wrestling mat, just to give you some scale. But we're just calling it multi-purpose because each school has a different need. Project is, moving into the procurement phase, so we're in the process of reviewing the submissions that have been brought to us by the contractors out there. And we're hoping to be under construction very soon this spring, and we'll have more information as we have a contractor and we're through the procurement phase, but we hope to have them all done by December of '25.
This is really, I guess, a question for Mr. Crowder. So we are anticipating bringing something to the board on the 28th of this month?
Yeah. So progress is moving. Okay, and then just one last slide here. A lot of questions about it, but the capital plan has a lot of projects in it, and they're all important. That's why they're on the capital plan. And you haven't heard a whole lot about the fine arts upgrades yet, and it's not because it's not important. It's just because we've had other priorities as a district, mainly providing desk space for the growth that we keep experiencing, which is a good problem to have. But don't want to forget about the fine arts upgrades, so we want to just let you know that we're working on that, and that's going to be into the procurement stage very, very soon, and we're hoping to have that underway this summer as well. And the scope of work is just to upgrade the stage curtains, the lighting, and the sound systems in all 5 high school auditoriums. So just wanted to update you on that. And that concludes the quarterly report. And I'll be around for questions and answers at the beginning of the next meeting.
Yep, so on the 28th, you'll be available at
Yes.
4:45.
Yes.
I wish I could tell you there was something meaningful about 4:45, like it was a Bible verse or something. It's not, it's just 4:45. I don't know why we did that, but thank you for being there for that. And then again, after today's meeting, I think school leadership and technology will be around if you guys have any follow-up questions from their quarterly report. Thank you, Doug. So, next up, I believe on their agenda is a presentation related to HB581, and I'm going to do something a little bit unusual. In fact, this might be a good break. The Davis family, you are welcome, and friends, y'all are welcome to stay. But this is I'm about to create an opportunity for y'all to slip out if you want to, because I'm going to walk out here to the podium, and I'll explain why here in just a second. But thank y'all for being here. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
As Tom mentioned earlier, this is our equivalent of going to the well. Right? Isn't it, we want to talk a little bit about 581. Again, I have a little bit that I was going to present, and Anna as well, but I'm going to step in and do some of this, a little bit more of this than I maybe originally had planned. But we also want to do it this way because these guys are going to be recording it on video to put out on the website. So that's the other reason for doing it this way. It'll go along with the press release. We'll have some information out there. And so we're going to move through this as quickly as possible. But the reality is it could have a significant impact on the school district. And so we want to give it its due. We want to make sure the board's well informed, the public, before making a decision. That I guess the two things I would stress the most is this is a permanent decision. It'll impact future boards. It's a permanent decision you're going to make coming up regarding opting out. It's also a statewide solution that you might be opting out of. And so one of the things we're going to leave you with, in fact, this is what Jason, that's how we're going to do it. I'm going to talk for a little bit, then I'm going to hand it off to Jason. He's going to come up and talk a little bit about some of the uniqueness of Paulding that's going to lead into a discussion about a potential board policy. And the idea there is we're not just looking to just opt out. I mean, number one, we have some pretty good best practices, we think, here in Paulding. But if the board chooses to opt out, we want them, the community and the board to have a potential answer to that. Because the spirit, I think the spirit of that legislation was good, the floating homestead. I think that was but it is a statewide solution, so it's not tailored for Paulding County, and I don't want to steal some of Jason's thunder, so I'll leave it there. But we want to have we want to offer a solution, as well as if the board chose to opt out. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's get started. I will mention at the onset, in this presentation, which again will be out on our website, there's also a more detailed analysis, or not analysis, but overview of HB581. We're not going to go into all that. It just talks about the specifics of the legislation. That's out there. It's attached actually to this presentation, so if anyone wants to look at it, they can. I will just mention, for the benefit of anyone watching the video, is of course when you look at HB581 and HR 1022, that is the floating homestead that we're talking about, the statewide floating homestead. HR 1022 is what empowered the constitutional amendment that passed recently. That constitutional amendment really had two provisions. The first one is to authorize the General Assembly to provide by general law a statewide homestead exemption that serves to limit increases in homestead values. That's the first thing that was approved statewide. But it also was approved by the voters, was empowered county, consolidated government, municipality, or local school systems based on their specific local circumstances to opt out of upon the completion of certain procedures. And so those procedures have already started with notifications in the paper. We'll have hearings. Ultimately, again, it's the board's decision. The decision to opt out is made by a board resolution, and then that has to be then provided to the Secretary of State by March 1st. So that constitutional amendment did those two things. But I wanted to tell you a little bit more about what the constitutional amendment did not do. And we have a slide here for that, if I can find it. Because there is some miscommunication out there, some misunderstanding. Opting out does not impact existing state or local property tax exemptions, including our recent increase to our senior exemptions. It does not impact that. It's confusing because the notifications, which the actual text of the notification was required by law, and it actually says intent to opt out of homestead exemptions. But that's not all exemptions. It's just you would be opting out of this floating homestead exemption. So it's caused some confusion out there. So you're not opting out of existing property tax exemptions. Those will continue on. It does not allow more than a one-time opportunity to opt out, regardless of the unforeseen consequences or unintended consequences, I should say. So again, it's a permanent thing that you're deciding on, and does not alter the constitutional requirement of the local school district to provide a publicly funded quality education for the children of Paulding County. I wanted to add that. That's a constitutional requirement, as you know, of the board. And so it doesn't relieve you of that. It just might challenge you on how you do that. So the only other thing I'll mention is that, just out of curiosity, I don't know if in case you did not know that, of our digest, about 50% are homestead properties. Parcels and value is roughly 50% of our digest. So the way I was going to frame my section here is to talk about state versus local control from a revenue perspective to begin with, and then we'll talk a little bit about expenditures. We've talked about this before, but the school board only has about control over local revenue, which is right now about 40% of total revenue. That's the amount that our board has direct control over. I will also add there's already a property tax cap imposed on the school board, and that's 20 mills. You can't go beyond 20 mills by law. So of that 40%, there are restrictions on the 40%. And that's unlike other governmental entities who are considering the same legislation, whether or not to opt in or opt out. They have more diverse revenue streams. They don't have the 20 mil cap. So I'll share more with you about that here in just a minute. But one word of caution would be.
Mr. Barnett,
Yes, ma'am.
can I ask you a question? Aren't there school districts that are above 20% already?
They are a couple. There were
Why is
some,
that?
and they predate, I think, some of what we're talking about. They are a handful, just a handful. And they were just special circumstances. Speaking of the 20 mills, though, that was one of the things I was going to mention is, just bear in mind, if we ever get to the 20 mills, you wouldn't want to do that for several reasons, but included in that would be the damage it could do to your credit rating. And subsequently, you'd pay more in interest on your bonds. Because when you've capped out, there's nowhere else to go. And when you go to market those bonds, the public, the market understands that, and so it restricts your ability to be able to cover those bond interests. So it's not a good thing, obviously, for many reasons, but especially for that reason. I was going to mention a little bit, I guess we were calling it collateral damage yesterday. In our case, the statewide floating homestead exemption could materially impact the equalization grant. We've talked about that before. That's unique to Paulding County. We're still the 4th largest recipient of equalization. It accounts for 7% of our total revenue, and it will have an impact. I can't tell you to what degree. The Department of Education can't tell you. It's just, but it will make an impact over time. The floating homestead, as it says there on the bottom right, I think, would further erode local control, making the school district more dependent on state and federal funding sources and subject to their control. The board already has best practices in place, and you'll hear more about that when we talk about a potential board policy. You've already demonstrated your responsible fiscal management, transparency, and the efficient use of taxpayer funds. And I'm going to read a quote. I am stealing a little bit of thunder from Jason's part, and I'm going to read you a little bit of quote of what that policy is going to say, because I think it's accurate, and I think it kind of frames what we're talking about here in a second. The board will advocate for sufficient and sustainable state and federal funding to ensure the delivery of a high-quality education for all students in Paulding County. Additionally, the board will establish reasonable and adequate levels of local funding while carefully considering the economic impact of property taxes on local taxpayers. We already do that. Y'all already do that. So what we're talking about is sort of formalizing that. Some other collateral damage to talk about relates to SPLOST. First off, I should say that Georgia law does not allow boards of education to participate in the new property tax relief law. We've already talked about that, the one that's allowed in HB581. Unlike other governments, school boards cannot participate in that. The caution here is that if it's approved by voters, that loss could further harm the collection of eSPLOST in several ways. One of the ways is it just further incentivizes them to purchase outside of Paulding County. And it doesn't help that our largest population center is right on the border with Cobb County. And so already that's what cripples our SPLOST. As you know, we collect 50, it's right there in the middle of the screen. We currently collect 55 cents for every dollar collected by our neighboring larger school districts. By the time you factor in debt service, that actually goes down to 41 cents. And part of that is, again, because that large population center that's moving across county lines for their goods and services, this is going to only potentially exacerbate that if the voters approve that loss. So it's challenging for us from that perspective. The other thing I would mention is that it could impact future our future eSPLOST approvals. I mean, at some point, the community, do they get fatigued on different SPLOST? And so we're going to be out there competing, for our SPLOST to get approved. And so we're, obviously that loss related to property tax relief would have to go for the voters. So I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but We can't participate in it, and it could have some potential impacts on the, some negative impacts on the school district.
So, Mr. Barnett, the lost penny, as they're calling this, hasn't been voted on yet. That's the key to this, correct?
Right.
So is that going to be in this legislative session? Is that what they're telling us? Because at the end of the day, the town hall that was held was that this was already kind of a foregone conclusion that the lost penny was there.
Well, in our case, yeah, the county.
It doesn't matter for us, but at the end of the day.
Yeah, if the county commissioners do not opt out, they will have this option, and they would take it before the voters in November. It would have to be approved by the voters.
So, Mr. Barnett, that means that.
Or they could, they don't have to, they could take it before the voters.
But that would mean Paulding County's tax would go from 7% to an 8% on the dollar tax if this were to pass, correct?
Correct.
And counties along the state of Georgia the same.
Yep, and the other thing to note is that my understanding of that is that it has to be used for property tax relief, so it can't be used for other things. It would just be reduction on the bill for property taxes. So it's not money that the county will necessarily have a lot of leeway as far as how to spend it. It's to go to relieve property taxes. So it's a lot of nuances to that. Again, we're not that involved in it because we are exempt from it. There's a quote there at the bottom of this slide, I think, that really encapsulates a lot of the issues with HB581. It says, the floating homestead exemption gives the illusion of tax relief, but in reality, it only shifts the burden to millage rate increases and other forms of taxation. Local governments will need to fund essential services, and when property tax revenues don't keep pace, they'll turn to millage rate hikes, sales taxes, and other fees to fill the gap. That was a good summation, but the thing I wanted to note was we don't have all those options. The board, obviously, the school board does not have those options. We don't have those other revenue sources or that flexibility. As you know, the school board has one tool in its toolbox regarding local revenue, and that is the millage rate, which again is capped by law. I did want to just highlight a couple things about the millage rate that we have, the school millage rate, and that is there, the larger chart, as we talk about often. Our millage rate is in line with other large districts in Georgia, large districts being defined as school districts with over 10,000 students enrolled. What's not in line with those districts is the percentage of our digest that's residential. This is very unlike those other districts. It's not even close. We do not compensate for the lack of that commercial and industrial properties in the digest by increasing the digest. That's a common misunderstanding, is that the homeowners in Paulding County are carrying an undue burden because of the missing commercial and industrial. They're not. We're charging the same rate, essentially the same, the board is charging essentially the same millage rate is even our comparable districts around us, Cobb, Cherokee, Douglas, Bartow. You'll see that of all those districts, we're actually lower than all of them except for Bartow, which you'll learn later why Bartow's, a little bit of a different situation. It's a great example, and Jesse's going to share with you. So the board has not chosen in the past, this is again part of those best practices, the board has not chosen in the past to increase the millage rate to try to compensate for that. We've done the very thing, the board has chosen not to do the very thing that sometimes is out there. And so I think that's just part of the best practices of the board. And so, yeah, you do see there on the bottom right, some of our neighbors. On average, if you include bond there all the way to the right, I believe, the average millage rate is 18.370. And again, we're 17.675. But the other thing I just want to note, and as the board knows, the board has lowered its millage rate 3 of the past 5 years. We've also have currently the lowest millage rate in 18 years. Of course, the board knows we've increased the senior exemption twice in that 5-year period. And we continue to hold to a 0 bond millage rate. So continuing on, we just want to talk a little bit about, primarily about QBE and austerity. Again, the board has sort of in its sphere that 40%, but a lot of things out of the board's control can influence the And so here's an example. Since 1985, Georgia has had the Quality Basic Education funding formula, and 17 times that has been reduced through austerity reductions in order to help balance the state's budget. That has impacted the school district by around $148 million over those 17 adjustments. So when the state does that, it puts an additional burden locally to raise those funds. So it's something to be aware of. It's not unknown that the state does that. And so when it happens, our board will have to have flexibility to address that locally. Oops, let me go back. The other couple things to mention on this slide is, and we've talked about this as well, is that you will have no control over what the statewide inflation index is used. It could be materially different than what the index is or what the inflation is just in our industry as far as education, which is what Ms. Lyles was asking about. Our inflation rate that's on the school district, and I'll share more with you in just a minute about that, is unique. It's unique to Paulding County, it's unique to education. But besides all that, the state's going to have to find, I know we talk about CPI, that may be the indicator that they use, but the law just says essentially that the state will determine an appropriate index, inflation index. And so what we experience here locally could be materially different than something regional or national. And then bottom left there, the floating homestead exemption in HB581 impairs our ability to recover from future recessions or other market adjustments or state level funding deficiencies. And that's the slide here. This isn't going to be a surprise to the board. We've talked about this, and I've shown this slide several times. So one thing that the law, that they're attempting to do is to address periods of unusual growth in the values of residential properties, homesteads in particular. And so I think that's the spirit of it. But what it doesn't address at all is what happens when there's a decline in the digest, like the Great Recession. There's no provision in the law that helps us deal with that. And so we take essentially the full hit. So that's the Great Recession there you see on the screen. We take the full hit as it goes down. There's no additional remedies or anything afforded the school board in that situation. But when you get to the bottom and it's time to start climbing out, this law would limit your ability to climb out of the hole, essentially. And so what you see there on the screen is back in 2008, right at the start of the Great Recession, we were already 25% lower in per pupil local revenue than the statewide average. That's the state is the green dot there, and we're the red dot in the line. So we started out 25% lower. By the time you get to 2024, at the sort of the conclusion of the Great Recession or a little bit beyond, we were still 23% lower than the statewide average. So we've come to rest back really right where we were at the beginning of the recession. And so one of the reasons a statewide solution is challenging for us is that we are already so far behind the averages for the state. Our digest looks different. We're behind in the average already, and so it's one of the reasons it's just not a good fit necessarily for Paulding County. And what you see there to the far right, that highlighted number, as you'll see here in a minute, we ran a projection to say what would have happened had this law been in effect during the Great Recession. What would the impact be? Where would we be today had these limits been in place using actual historic CPI numbers? And we'd be at around $60 million lower today in revenue. And so you just do the math, and that comes out to just under $1,500 a student. So that's the difference between the 33.19, which we were. You can see how much lower we were from the state, but it would take us all the way down to $1,444 as an estimate, which obviously would, and we'll share more a little bit about that in a minute, would have some pretty serious implications to that.
Mr. Burnett, can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
If you're talking about equalization, what's going on with that? They're adjusting it? I mean, are they doing away with it, or what's going on?
Well, equalization, I think the formula is still intact. It's just what happens locally influences what our allocation of equalization is. And so it's like we've talked about before, you can't intentionally make yourself more low wealth in order to get equalization. In some ways, it follows that same logic. You know, there's going to be a lot of noise when it comes to equalization. What school districts opt out, what school district doesn't, how does that influence the market in those counties? You know, there's going to be this period where there's going to have to be some sort of a stabilization, because equalization is all about how you compare to other school districts in Georgia. It's designed for those lower revenue school districts, and so we don't know how it's going to play out at the end. Will we still be the fourth largest recipient? We just don't know. But we know that it will make a difference. So it is not going away. It's just what our allocation of equalization might be could change.
And has that increased with the inflation? I mean, is it proportional?
No.
And the other question I have is, rapid growth, that grant is gone. Are we still eligible, or are we receiving anything?
No, we are not. I do think some of our legislators are working on something again to try to push that through.
So it's not available right now?
It is not available to us,
But
no.
it possibly will be?
Yep. Yep, that is correct. And just looking a little bit more, again, state versus local control. You know, Georgia law does limit the financial reserves that a school board can have. That's another restriction. Other governments don't have that, but state law prevents the school board from having too much fund balance. And so that's an option we can't have in the event that there is an economic downturn, another Great Recession. That's sort of not available to us. Just looking at QBE, though, I want to make sure folks understand that the quality basic education formula is not completely funded by the state. Local school boards also have to pay a part of QBE. In fact, in order to receive QBE funds from the state, the local board of education has to pay the equivalent of 5 meals locally, whatever that is. It has to pay the equivalent of 5 meals in as a local fair share. So the board makes the first payment toward a quality basic education. And so I say that to say that is, again, a constraint of the board. You have no options there. I mean, that's a requirement of the law unless you don't want your full QBE funding, which obviously we do. To give you a sense of scale there on the screen, I believe it should say, most recently, that local fair share piece was $35 million. Over the last 10 years, it was $207 million that was the board's portion of QBE. So just a couple other things to note regarding QBE. Again, as I've mentioned a couple times, it was first created in 1985. It does not accurately reflect the cost of educating a student in Georgia. It doesn't address all the support services that are necessary, like mental health, security, socioeconomic disparities. There's just a lot about QBE that's good, and there's a lot of things that need to be updated. And so I think a lot of the focus that could be spent in this area really would be better to hone in on QBE and figure out how to modernize QBE would be a good legislative initiative. But ironically, it might actually just come up with what Ms. Lyons just said. The QBE formula, including equalization, is not adjusted for inflation at all. So ironically, if you think about it, this law limits our local ability to raise funds by inflation. But what you don't realize is you're already absorbing inflation at the state level because QBE doesn't allow for inflation. Well, those expenses are inflated. There's inflation with those expenses just like anything else. So who's paying for that? Locally, it's being paid. And so it's just ironic that it's limiting our ability to raise local funds, which are going to be used to pay the inflation on state funding.
So,
My other question is there such a thing as federal rapid growth funds, or could we talk to our legislators and see if there's something that they could do for us?
Well, I do think they are working on legislation
I'm talking
for
about
that.
federal.
Federally, yeah,
Is
we
there-
can certainly look into it.
Yeah,
You know, one of the
just
big
wondering if there's any
unknowns,
kind of grants available for us.
but you know, with the new administration coming in, one of the big unknowns is what's going to happen to federal
Not be
funding.
a Department of Education.
How's that going to look? Is that money, you know, just going to flow down to the states and then get allocated out? Maybe it's no different to us down the line, or maybe it is very different. So it's another unknown that's sort of associated with all this. We can certainly look into it.
Yeah, I think it might be a good thing for
So,
counties like us.
so when you look at expenditures, and again, you look at that state versus local control, as I said earlier, CPI is really not an accurate indicator of inflation for a school district. So some of the examples that we put up there on the screen are related to compensation and other things, but I would just say operating costs in general obviously are much higher for the school district. The school board knows that. I mean, over the last several years, the price of a school bus is gone up almost 50%. The fuel is another example. It's gone up a good bit, probably 30% over the last 8 years or so. Safety measures obviously are something that's an expense that the school district's having to absorb that it hasn't in years past. But the biggest one that I'll mention here in just a second is wage inflation and our ability to compete for talent, which again is ironically influenced by the state. And of course, we appreciate whenever they adjust the pay scales for teachers, but there are unintended consequences to that locally that we have to deal with. But the biggest one I was going to mention is right at this point is that earlier today we talked about those specialty services and how they're growing in Paulding County. Those come at a larger cost, and so we're having to absorb that. All those categories we showed you earlier: special education, gifted, remedial, and ESOL. The board has to figure out a way to pay for that.
Okay, Mr. Barnett, I apologize for asking so many questions, but I guess what I want to say is a little institutional knowledge here, is back in 2008 or 9, we had, when the recession hit, I was on the board, and I remember I've just gotten on the board, and we had to do two things. We had to cut our staff by 30%, which is profoundly impacts the classroom. And secondly, we had to increase our student numbers in the classroom because we had to cut such a drastic number of teachers. So it's going to, the bottom line is it's going to impact the classroom profoundly. Less staff, bigger classrooms. And I don't understand how, what's going on with our legislation. I don't understand how, I don't know if they understand how profoundly it's going to affect us in the classroom. But that's something that needs to be talked about. The bottom line of what we're looking at.
That is a great example. I'm going to come back to that here in just a second. But just to give you all some quick numbers related to what you see on the screen, when it comes to classified health insurance, the district's classified health insurance has gone up over $7 million in the last 3 years alone. That is the state shifting classified health insurance expense from the state locally that the board has to absorb. It's scheduled to increase at least another $3 million in FY26. And so that's an example of an expense that's being shifted. It's also an example of an unfunded mandate because you have no options there. It's not like you can go out and shop. You want to go out and shop for your own, you're going to stay in obviously with the health insurance, the state health
Another 4%?
benefit plan.
3.
Another 3.
We talked about special education already. I will tell you that in FY20, we spent right at 29% more than we spend on a baseline student. So what we spend on every student, on average, we spent 29% more on special education students. Fast forward from 20 all the way to 24, that number is 33%. So we've made progress. But that little percent difference, at 29 to 33 over those years, is $6 million. And largely that $6 million was funded locally. And it's great that we've made some progress there. But just so you know, the last survey we did with some of our comparable districts, that percentage was 43%. So we're still 33% compared to their 43% addition over and above sort of the baseline of all students. So special education is something we've been really pushing, trying to improve on. That hill's going to get steeper, could potentially get steeper. And then, of course, critical initiatives sometimes are not funded or underfunded by the state. Safety and security is a good example of that. That's the chart there on the screen. So the board has spent $12 million in the last 3 years on safety and security operations. Not one-time, capital projects, but just in the operating of the Safety and Security Department, $12 million. The state has started to kick in $1.5 million. The governor yesterday announced his priorities this legislative session, and that's hopefully going to stay in the QB formula, so we should see another $1.5 million. So that's great. They've also discussed perhaps some one-time additions to that. Those are great, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't fund a whole lot. And so the rest of that's going to have to come locally. So let me shift here to compensation was the other thing I wanted to share with you a little bit, a few numbers with the board. So in FY24, the board increased certified pay scales by $3,000. You might remember that. Not this budget year, the prior year. The state funded $2,000 for certified. We're talking about certified right now. That additional $1,000 we had to fund locally at a cost of about $4 million. So that's just an example of what happens. We're thankful for any support we get from the state, but sometimes it creates challenges for the board, because then what are you going to do with classified? They fund very little of our classified compensation budget. So what are you going to do? You're going to leave those guys behind. Of course, the board has always not done that. You brought them along sort of at the same percent or close to. So it just brings on challenges. I just say that to say it's not just the school board that creates wage inflation. It's both the state and the local. For us, we're just trying to stay competitive against some neighbors that have perhaps more resources than we do. And so it is a challenge to maintain the most skilled and qualified workforce as possible. In FY25, the health insurance cost, I would say that I just mentioned earlier, that increase in health insurance costs locally was probably the primary reason in FY25. You might remember state certified $2,500. We didn't add anything to that year. We stayed at 25. The primary reason we had to do that was because of the increase in health insurance that I mentioned earlier. So it does make a difference. That same year, this year, FY25, you might remember, we only increased classified by about $2 million. Again, we were just limited as to what we could do. We wanted to do something because the state was providing $2,500 for certified, so we wanted to do something for classifieds. That came in lower at $2 million.
Mr. Barnett?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to say this for public knowledge because what I'm hearing in the public, I want to clarify that our safety, are they considered central office staff? Our safety people that are out in the schools, our resource officers?
No, they're out at they're coded to the schools themselves. Some are. Some of our leadership is, but no, they're out at the school level.
But that's
they're not administrative costs. Yeah.
What now?
They're not administrative costs. Your local safety officer or safety coordinator is not an administrative cost, is what I was trying to say, yeah.
But he's considered central office staff?
Some of the leadership structure is.
Okay.
Like Mr. Rupel,
yeah,
for example, who serves all the schools. Again, going back to 24, just to remind the board, you might remember, the board spent $3.5 million to adjust the classified employees for that year. $2 million this year, this budget year. Prior year was even more at 3.5. All that had to be funded locally. And so it's just a word of caution that to further restrict your ability, you might want to consider whether you want to restrict your ability to raise funds locally, how you believe is best, and how you were elected to represent the community and what you're charged to do. I will tell you two quick stats that came out. We just received our most recent staff retention survey. I can tell you the number one factor that encourages our employees to stay in their current position was compensation and benefits. The number one reason. When you look at school staff satisfaction and with compensation and benefits, school staff satisfaction with compensation and benefits, the number one thing they were satisfied with the most is a retirement plan, which makes sense, 77%. Health insurance was next, 76%. Leave time or time off was 74%. Disability and life insurance was 74%. So they were all kind of right in there as being what they were most satisfied with. Number 5, the last one in the group, was compensation. And that was 52%. And, you know, like I say all the time, we stay in the game, but the reality is, you know, we sit adjacent to a very wealthy, or I'll say a more wealthy school district that can afford to pay really well. And we just got to stay in the game. We just got to, both culturally and also physically. So, again, just kind of moving on to the overall financial impact. Not going to go into a whole lot of detail here because we have talked about this a good bit. But there is a little bit of a reality check here, and that is the long-term, you know, I should back up and say, well, no, let's do it right here. So I wanted to come back and address what Ms. Lyons talked about. When you look at the financial impact, it is 100% accurate to say that no one really understands the long-term impact of this floating homestead exemption. They don't. They don't, and I'm not claiming that would be an easy thing to analyze, but it's one of the reasons the board has repeatedly put in its legislative priorities is, hey, do some sort of note before legislation so that we have a sense of what the impact would be, positive, negative. And that's just been a challenge. I think it wouldn't have been easy, but I do think we needed to have done something like that so that local boards could understand what is the long-term impact of this, especially before making a decision to opt out or not. But what we do know is that on average, I think it says that there, well, let me back up. Yeah, no, it's actually at the top. We know that on average, we collect 90 cents for every dollar when it comes to total revenue per pupil statewide. So statewide, for every dollar they collect, we collect 90 cents. If you drill down locally, for every dollar collected per pupil locally, we're 74 cents. And that is what's just unique, again, to Paulding County. So what you see there on the screen there is we've estimated the impact, the actual long-term impact of 581 as best we can. In fact, the first dot there is actually looking backwards. It's saying, okay, let's look back the past 5 years. What would the last 5 years look like? It was a decrease of around right at $8 million annually. Cumulatively, we would be up to $38 million at this point. We also looked at projecting the future 5 years, the next 5 years. What would that look like if it starts today, which is as the law is designed? Again, about $5 million on average. Within 5 years, we'd be up to around $24 million in cumulative loss in revenue. And as Ms. Lyons said, 90% of our budget is people. So when we think about what would we have done in this circumstance, what will we do? You can't, it's unavoidable. It's going to have to involve people. So the things we did was exactly what we did. We looked back. What have we done in the past in this situation? When the market crashed, and what do we do then? What were our solutions then? And the solutions were exactly what she just said. We had to cut staff, it increased class size, and we had furlough days. There were all sorts of mitigations that we had to do to just survive, essentially. And those would sort of be the same solutions we'd go back to today. Because again, out of 90% of your budget is people, that's sort of what you have to go with, because you don't have that much influence on the 10% for several reasons, but one of which is there's some non-negotiables in there, like safety and security. Like at some point, you're going to replace buses. You're not going to allow your fleet to get so old it becomes a safety issue. So there's a lot of constraints on the 10%, a lot more constraints on the 10% than there are on the 90. So that's where you have to go to make up the difference. And again, that other bullet there just says, okay, I mentioned this earlier, kind of a what-if scenario. If we went back to 2013 and went through the Great Recession, the recovery, where would we be? It's about $60 million cumulative at this point. And then there at the bottom of the screen, we talked about this before, there is still an unknown. Another unknown is what's the market? What's the impact of the market? What happens when one individual is sitting here paying much, much lower in property taxes next door to someone who just purchased their home? It's now reset, they're paying a higher rate. What kind of chill factor is that going to have to selling this home? Because I know if I sell my home, it's going to reset the value to whatever I buy. And so there's this whole market kind of a distortion that's going to happen over time that I don't think really anyone completely understands. I know I don't. So I'm going to shift here to Jason, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the uniqueness of Paulding, and it's going to lead into that board policy. But again, that policy is designed to, in order not just to opt out, but to leverage the board's best practices to create a potential board policy that's similar to the spirit of HB581, the flow to homestead, but it's tailored to the uniqueness of Paulding County, if that makes sense, and considers elements that are outside your control. Before we do that, I bet we're going to take a break.
We are. Thank you so much. It's been requested that we take a quick break before we transition to Mr. Gregatis. So if you will give us 5 minutes, can we do that?
Ish.
We are back in session. Thank you so much. Mr. Grigatis, could you carry us through the next?
Absolutely. I almost said good afternoon, board, but it's I should be relatively quick, as Mr. Barnett did say most of what I was going to tell you today in my portion of the slides. But just wanted to reiterate that this statewide exemption really is a one-size-fit-all. It's probably safe to assume that folks, at least some of the General Assembly, understood this, that there are some uniqueness in counties. That's why they put in an opt-out. But we did want to share how really unique Paulding is and how that impacts us. So you've seen some of these slides before. A little out of order for me. But the first is our growth. So House Bill 581 does not take into consideration growth. So you set a cap for property tax values for homesteads, but it doesn't account for the growth that we continue to see in Paulding County. You heard the DOA report say that as a state, during that 4-year study, there was 0 growth. In Paulding County, 7%. During this window, when you start comparing Paulding County to local or to large districts across the state, we actually have a 2-year annual growth rate. So more students equals more teachers, more resources, not accounted for in House Bill 581. The second portion of that, let me back up, is something you've seen and Mr. Barnett has shared multiple times, is that our residential unbalanced digest. When we have 86% of our digest that is residential, and you're talking about an exemption that is targeted to homestead, it just makes sense that we're going to be disproportionately impacted by that when 86% of our digest is residential. I do want to note, Mr. Barnett mentioned one of our local counties, local large counties being lower than us in millage rate, and that is Bartow County. They're third from the right over here. So when you look at the tax digest in Bartow County compared to Paulding, Paulding's 86% residential, Bartow's less than 50% residential. Wow. So a lot more flexibility of what their board can do with the millage rate. So neither of these things are new to Paulding County. We've always had explosive growth since the 1990s. We've always had an unbalanced digest in Paulding County that we've enjoyed a lot. But as Mr. Barnett showed, it does have an impact on, these slides are tricky, Mr. Barnett. It does have an impact on per pupil revenue that we can bring in. So this being a statewide exemption, I do want to bring this to your attention. It's listed and qualified as a statewide exemption. However, in terms of local fair share, it's going to be a local exemption. So we've heard that through GSSA, GSBA. So it will impact our local fair share by being a local exemption. This, when we talk about total revenue per pupil, you saw that slide that Ms. Burnett shared. $8,900 is what we have for total revenue. The state sometimes makes up what we lack in local revenue. Our revenue total is $8,800, so about $1,000 less than the state. Had House Bill 581 been intact during those years as we climbed out of the Great Recession, you can see the impact, the difference between what we would have in total revenue per pupil versus the state would be closer to $3,000. So it does have a significant, we deal with that and manage through that and have for years and years, but there, I believe, comes a point where managing with a good bit less than what everyone else in the state compared to managing to $3,000 less per pupil is severely impactful. So what we've talked about, this bill looks as a statewide homestead exemption. It does not, it would serve to limit the homestead growth that we have, but it does limit control for our board. This board and future boards in how we manage our revenue through difficult times, through extraordinary circumstances such as that Great Recession. And then it doesn't account for several factors that we have. So one of the things we talked about possibly doing is the board creating and adopting a policy that could have some of the spirit of House Bill 581, but also encompass some of the uniqueness of Paulding County. So maintain local control, take into consideration enrollment growth when that happens, our digest being unbalanced. So we've drafted a policy. It's DA goals and objectives. Now, it seems strange for me to come and talk about new policies when we just got rid of hundreds of policies, but DA was a policy that we did not have. It's under financial management in school board policy manuals, and it's used throughout the state. There are counties that have policy DA goals and objectives. So if we wanted to create a policy like that, We could start, and you see it's outlined here, the first paragraph just talking about the board recognizes that they need to be good financial stewards of taxpayer money, have responsible financial management, transparency in budget processing. At the same time, the second paragraph talks about here outlining the board's commitment to provide a high-quality education for the students in Paulding County. And in order to do that, that requires having manageable class sizes, having a safe and secure learning environment for our students, and having a qualified and effective workforce. So there are things that we believe are important, or the board believes important, to provide for our students in Paulding County. The last paragraph there that's highlighted in bold talks about a board's role in this policy, and that would be to advocate on behalf of Paulding County students and families for state and federal funding. This is something the board currently does through legislative priorities. I think Ms. Lyons, you just mentioned that, talking about federal funding and advocating for that. But at the same time, the board understands that they have to establish a reasonable, adequate level of funding through the millage and exemptions and consider the impact that it has on our citizens. The policy could set expectations for the superintendent that are similar to what we currently have, following best practice, and mirror some of our current practices around advanced planning, effective budgeting, operational efficiency, and timely communication. The district could charge the superintendent with reviewing tax digest information, which is something that's a normal practice in the school district, establishing or looking at estimated increases to local property tax revenue year over year and other tax digest changes. And this is where it becomes unique. In this paragraph, that second and third paragraph, we could utilize almost identical some of the language that's in House Bill 581. So the board could charge the superintendent or his designee to utilize the annual inflationary rate, index rate that would reflect inflation or deflation, but have that rate be specific to Paulding County. We talk about, Mr. Barnett mentioned that we're not even sure what inflationary index rate would be used in House Bill 581, but more than likely it would be a statewide inflationary index rate. So charging the superintendent to utilize an annual inflationary rate. The difference would be in talking about taking into those considerations what House Bill 581 does not do, which is talk about some of the uniqueness of Paulding County. So that would be looking at enrollment growth, knowing that if we grow 500 students in a year, that's going to have funds that are required to it. So the superintendent would be charged with adjusting that inflationary index rate by enrollment growth. If we had enrollment growth, we would have to adjust the inflationary rate. State and federal funding, so what Mr. Barnett mentioned as unfunded mandates. Lots of those we don't have choice in. The austerity cuts that Mr. Barnett mentioned, we didn't get to say, we're going to opt out of the austerity cuts. We would like our full QB funding this year. That's not an option. State health benefits, some of that being shifted over. It gives flexibility in those areas to be able to adjust the inflationary index rate to meet the needs of Paulding County and our students. Per pupil deficiencies, that really talks about what slides we've seen already, how far behind we already are from the state in revenue. And those first four are out of the board's control. We can't control enrollment growth, and we know there are a number of housing permits and developments already underway in Paulding County. Enrollment growth is going to continue, if not accelerate, in the future years. State and federal funding, we don't have options on those unfunded mandates. And then we really have limited impact in our tax digest. We're 86% residential. The board can't decide next month that we're going to be 75% or 65%. And the last one is unique. This is within the board's control. So critical initiatives, adjusting that inflationary index rate to say there are some things that we believe firmly in Paulding County, both our board and our stakeholders, that are moral imperatives for our school district. So Mr. Barnett mentioned safety. This board has committed $12 million, I believe, over the past several years. That's not state funding. That's not federal funding. We've utilized local funding, which comes from a millage rate. We've done that because we believe it's an imperative that we have safe and secure schools above and beyond what the state or federal government would fund for us. So it gives us that flexibility in there to adjust that inflationary rate that House Bill 581 does not. So essentially, once that was done, once we took into consideration, superintendent took into consideration all of these deficiencies, he or she would utilize the inflationary index rate, adjusted, and compare that to what home value percentage increases year over year. If we've changed that inflationary rate based on those factors, and the real property values is far above that, then that may equate to a decrease in millage. If it's the opposite, then the superintendent would have to talk about how to mitigate that, or how to justify the difference in between those inflationary rates and the change in real property value. So this is just a sample. We've not seen, to our knowledge, there's not a board policy like this across the state that takes into consideration some of the language in 581. But we think it's crucial. It's a way to bring in, it's a means to incorporate some of the good things from House Bill 581. We're also thinking about the uniqueness of Paulding County and the uniqueness of funding in the state of Georgia in 2025 when you think about QBE and what we believe are essential functions or critical functions for our school district. So it's something the board could consider to have the spirit of House Bill 581, but also meet some of the uniqueness and the deficiencies within that bill.
I just want to point out something we've learned today, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but you take the fact that we just built a new middle school, which you can use SPOS funds to build a school, but you can't use SPOS funds to staff the school. Same for our 2 additional elementary schools that we're building now. And if the county keeps growing at the rapid rate that it's growing, we're going to end up building more schools in the next 10 to 20 years. So I just want to point out that if the county, for example, like Mr. Barnett talked about, if the county opts in and then they put their 1% splash to the voters and it passes, our tax goes from 7% to 8%. Now, eSPLOST is something we depend on to build those schools that everybody's crying about. Why is the district not moving fast? Why are they not building schools? Well, we're pumping them out now, right? And we're going to continue to do that. So here's the thing. If they go to 8% and the county doesn't opt in, then you have an eSPLOST comes up for the vote. And you've got people out here that are going to say, we need that tax back down to 7%. Then your eSPLOST vote is in jeopardy. So let's assume that we've opted in, so we've capped ourselves there. Then we've capped ourselves if that eSPLOST that's not guaranteed fails. So now we're in a mess where we can't build a school. We can't do anything without putting bond taxes back on the digest, raising the millage rate to 20%. And I don't know that it's a good steward for this school board to put a future school board in jeopardy of having to raise the millage rate and max out the entire digest back to square one to build schools. Because it's kind of like what you said, how Paulding is unique. And we're unique in the fact that housing is continuing to grow and grow and grow with no control, it doesn't seem like. So that puts the burden on us for these schools that we have to build. And if you take the funding away, especially the staffing of the new school, it can create a big mess for the entire, or domino effect for the entire future of the county, in my opinion. Am I on the right track with you guys?
And the 1%, if the 1% loss tax, it passes, we are not able to participate in that. So we're still back to that 7%. And you're right, if we go and try to do another eSPLOST.
Well, and eSPLOST are not guaranteed. I mean, they're not, I mean, we've been fortunate that our voters have done that for us to build new facilities and do renovations. Mr. Carey, thank you for doing your report the same day as well, because I think it ties in perfectly. But it's just a scary afterthought. But I do commend the legislators for at least recognizing that, hey, here's an opt-out provision. So it makes me feel better too as a voter and as a school board member that everybody that voted for this voted for an opt-out provision too. So, you know, I would rather be sitting here now saying, okay, let's opt out versus 3 years from now saying, hey, I've got to raise your taxes on the millage rate. I think there's a worse effect in us doing that than just staying where we are now. That's all I got.
Yeah, no, that's great. Again, this is just a first draft, but it is designed to bring a lot of things together. Not everything in HB 581 was bad. I mean, and even the spirit of what we're talking about, the floating homestead, was not bad. I mean, those 2 years of a lot of extreme growth, that was unsettling. I mean, that was a shock to the system. Hopefully that's a once-in-a-lifetime event. Hopefully the Great Recession is a once-in-a-lifetime event, but certainly not going to be, you know, frequent. And so we just, you know, was it a bit of an overreaction? At least perhaps in its solution it was. And so for us, we're just trying to figure out, okay, what's a way that we can leverage the board's good practices, the solid practices we've developed over years? How can we marry that to the spirit of what's in the floating homestead, tailored to the unique conditions here in Paulding that Jason talked about. And what are some of those elements that we can include in our policy that mimics the floating homestead portion of HB581, but considers the things that are outside the board's control?
And I think the
that's good stewardship.
Yeah, the flexibility in that is also, because as we've seen, that's some of the things outside of our control. There may be a time when we're not growing. There may be a time where we don't have a shift in state health benefits to the county. But there are also times where we have austerity cuts. So to box in the school district that would be a concern.
You know what, I asked Mr. Barnett a question while we had the break, and it was, this is for you, Doug, if we're possibly gonna have to increase our student sizes and how many students are in the classroom, could we build bigger rooms, kind of preparing for that? But Mr. Barnett said that the state controls the size of every classroom, so we couldn't even build larger classrooms for extra 5 kids in a high school classroom. We can't, the state limits us so that we can't do that, and that probably is something that our legislators should talk about. Because if you're going to force us into cutting our staff and increasing our class sizes, at least let us make a bigger room for 5 extra teenage boys in a classroom. Because
I think we try not to think about
but
class sizes.
I know, but
any
I'm just
larger.
saying, you think about the ripple effect and how it's going to affect the students, because that's what matters. We don't want to put an extra 5 kids in every classroom. So we have to do what we have to do. We can't not anticipate what the ripple effect would be. So we've got, like, that was in that policy, the superintendent will plan ahead, and the state limits us on a lot of things that we that how can you plan for, and you can't adjust your classroom size, but you have to put more students. So it's just, that's another area that they have control over us. So
And we have experience with that from the recession.
I know, I was here.
As you mentioned, yeah.
You were here too. But anyway, that's.
So we are, thank you, Dr. Grigatis. We, of course, we're not going to go through this whole presentation in our hearings, but we do have a slide. I'm not going to go through it, where we're going to talk about what the potential outcomes of not opting out. But I did want to show you the very first one is that if you sum all this back up to what I originally even started with, this is going to be a one-time permanent adoption of a statewide, state-controlled solution as opposed to a tailored approach that considers the uniqueness of Paulding County. I think that's probably the best summary of what we're looking at. And our goal with this today was to inform the board, the community. It was also to provide a viable alternative that marries all these different competing interests. So this information, all of it, the video will all go on our website with the press release itself. I was just going to mention, for what it's worth, in the last GSSA poll, around 80% of school districts are likely to opt out. And even of our RESA group, which is just under 20 regional school districts, all of them have indicated they're likely to opt out. Of course, no one knows until they pass that resolution. No one can say for sure, but that's what they're likely to do. I just wanted the board to be aware of that. And then next steps are just those 3 public hearings that are coming up on the 28th, the 30th, and the 4th. All the information on the website is being advertised. And then ultimately there on February the 11th, the board will make its final decision. And again, if you want more details of the actual law itself, it's in this presentation beyond this conclusion slide. So, Madam Chair, unless there's more questions, I'll move on to business items.
Absolutely, move on.
Well, I'm going to move on, but I'm actually going to ask Mr. Crowder to come up. Out of all the things we talked about today, we have saved the best for last. Let's talk a little grease trap pumping.
I thought you might mention that, lighten the mood a little bit. Good morning, everybody. I have two items for presentation this morning. The first is our renewal of our invitation for bid for septic tank and grease trap pumping. That contract originally awarded to Wind River Environmental for the initial one-year term that began February 2024. Solicitation was bid with 3 potential one-year options for renewal with proven quality, performance, and price. And this will be our first option for renewal on that one. And then we've got one more. Next, I have the AIA construction contract with RK Redding Construction for the renovation and modification to Moses Middle School. A little background on that one. On October 22nd, 2024, RK Redding was awarded the RFP for construction management at risk for the construction of a renovation modification project at Moses Middle School. That renovation will consist of new HVAC system, intercoms, LED lighting, plumbing and roof upgrades, flooring replacements, various kitchen equipment, and asphalt repairs. The guaranteed maximum price for that presented contract is in the amount of $7,369,713. Just as a reminder on these contracts for GMPs, the architect fees are contracted separately as professional services, as well as additional costs including pre-construction, furniture, fixtures, equipment, and technology are not included in that GMP price. And then both of these will be placed onto the agenda for approval January 28th. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to us before then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowder. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
All right, we are at a point where we need to adjourn to executive session.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I apologize.
During executive session, we will be discussing personnel, land, and legal matters. No votes will be taken except for the approval of our executive session minutes from our previous meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn to executive session? So moved by Mr. Clayton, second by Mr. Nolan. Any discussion? All in favor? It is approved, and we are adjourned to executive session. We are reconvening after executive session where no votes were taken except the approval of the minutes. We discussed personnel, land, and legal. And at this time, I will turn our meeting over to our superintendent for our action items.
So I have one action item at this point, which is the approval of personnel. I request approval of items number 1 through 19 and number 21 through 61.
Hearing the superintendent's recommendation to approve personnel items 1 through 19 and 21 through 61, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
So moved by Mr. Nolan, second by Mr. Clayton. Any discussion? All in favor? And there's 5 with 2 absent. We are now at the time for public participation. I don't believe we have anyone. Okay. So now it's time for board member comments. I am scheduled to be the first person to speak today. First of all, I don't have a lot to say. I said a lot earlier, but I did want to say thank you to my fellow board members for the confidence to be chairman again another year. Maybe I can speak better next week. Got my words mixed up today, but I sincerely enjoy working with my team, and I do sincerely mean that each one of us are here. The why we serve is for the future of our kids, and I'm excited to see pictures each month of different students and to just remind us that our focus is those students and their future, and it's the future of Paulding County. So I just want to say thank you to the team that put that video together, and we'll be continuing to put a video together for us. And again, thank you so much to my team for your confidence. I hope I serve you well. Mr. Fuller.
All right. Congratulations, Ms. Collette, and glad to have you take the helm one more year and continue the work that we've done. And I appreciate my fellow board members elected me to assist you in that role as vice chair. And I appreciate Mr. Barnett and Mr. Gagatis and y'all's efforts on getting the information we need on the upcoming tax exemption situation we're in. And thank you for your presentation, Mr. Carey, on the facilities. It's an exciting time. I hope the public gets a chance to watch the board meetings when you're here, just so they know how much work we're having to do and what goes on, because it is a lot. And we certainly appreciate all that. And Mr. Barnett, your popularity on Friday was like soaring through the roof. Your popularity on Sunday afternoon was not so much, but so I did get a text from one of my kids that said, well, this is great. Then on Sunday, I got one that says, you stink. So, talk about me.
Yeah, no, I got the same thing.
But anyway, no, I hope everybody had fun in the snow. You're right, it was a much-needed break, not only for students, but just for everybody. And it sounds like yesterday went pretty smooth, and I'm glad everybody's back and safe, and that's all I've got.
I just want to say thank you everyone for the presentations today. It was a lot of information to take in and kind of try and facilitate through it, real quickly. But I appreciate all the work and hard work that goes into to putting all that together for us to make it understandable and easy to kind of digest and make the best decision we can for Paulding County, because that's essentially what we're here and looking to do, is make the best decision we can for Paulding County, not anybody else. So I'm excited that the naming of Paulding County's auditorium went to Dr. Davis. I never had him personally, but I had my best friends were in band at Hiram, and they to this day talk about what a great instructor and leader and mentor that he was to them through high school. So I know it's a well-deserved honor for him. And thank you to First Baptist of Dallas for all that they do with our school system and being the partner education this month. It doesn't take a village or a community to raise a kid, and we love our partners, and they really help make it easier for us to educate and raise these kids in our system. So everyone have a great day.
Ms. Lyons.
Okay, I have to do something. Since you didn't get the opportunity to do it, I'm going to say ditto. So I love the snow day song. That was awesome. Let's have a snow day and wear your pajamas. So everybody wore their pajamas the next day, and that was so creative and beautiful. And she has a beautiful voice, so She did a great job. And Mr. Popular. I loved that video. It was
That was
awesome.
cute. Super.
But I want to say thank you to Debbie. You have worked so hard this year. You really have. And you are so diligent and so meticulous about everything that you do. You have a standard of excellence, and we meet your standard.
Thank you.
And whatever, I mean, we couldn't do what we do if you didn't do what you do. So,
Thank you.
and I appreciate
Don't do
you.
it by myself.
Well, I appreciate you being willing to do it again.
Thank you.
Because you have done an excellent job. Like I said, ditto to everything they said. So y'all enjoy the rest of your day. I hope it's a good one for you. And that's all I have.
Mr. Nolan?
Ditto. I appreciate you, Ms. Collette, taking on the role again this year. Those of us on the board who have served in the position understand that if it's done the way it should be, it is not anything less than time-consuming, irritating some days, and always tedious, because getting 7 people on the same page and working through all of the issues that a chairperson has to work through if they're doing the job properly to make sure that everyone's concerns are assuaged is not an easy thing. We have disagreements in how we see things moving forward, and you do a great job of taking the time to hear each board member, their concerns, and trying to find solutions that meld around all of those concerns to get to a consensus. And that is a special talent, and I appreciate you doing it the way you do it.
Thank you. Learn from you.
Can I add one more thing? I'll say ditto to you too, but I would say that you're a peacemaker instead of a peacekeeper, and that's a gift.
Thank you. Thank you. With all that being said, it is time to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Nolan, second by Mr. Clayton, and I got your name right again, thank goodness. Any discussion? All in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye. Thank you. We are adjourned.